Right, strikes. We may be into the new year, but in terms of the strikes, nothing has changed, has it? As rail workers from the RMT and ASLEF unions return to the picket lines this week. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer has vowed to repeal any anti-strike laws introduced by Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, which would have imposed minimum service levels on striking sectors and allow employers to sue unions and sack striking staff. Meanwhile, of course, junior doctors are now threatening to walk out for 72 hours in March. The BMA, that's their union, is demanding a 26% pay increase. They say that would bring them up to where they would have been were it not for real terms cuts, or indeed cuts that don't keep up with inflation. But what are we to make of it all, and whose side are you on in this particular political game of chess? Now, I've got two fantastic guests with me to debate this. Firefighter and trade unionist Paul Embery is with us down the line, and former special advisor to Michael Gove Charlie Rowley. Charlie, I'll start with you. So Rishi Sunak is very keen to bring in some kind of anti-strike legislation. He would argue that he needs to balance the rights of ordinary workers, well, general workers, with those who happen to be in unions. Where do you think the right balance is?
Well, good afternoon, and thanks for having me on, Emily. But I think Rishi is absolutely right to bring this legislation forward. I think some of the stories that we've heard, particularly over the winter months, where we've heard people that weren't able to get the medical care that they are absolutely entitled to, what they should be deserving, they've not been able to receive that because of the industrial action that's regrettably taken place. Nobody wants to see these strikes continue or go on longer than necessary. But I think in a society where you have other sectors in the public sector space, such as police, such as the armed forces, who are not able to strike, I think having legislation which requires just a minimum safety level to ensure that people will absolutely get the medical attention that they need, or they will have the emergency response to anything that they need, is absolutely the right approach. And I think that's what the public would expect, it's what they deserve, and I think they'll be on the side of Rishi Sunak. Now,
Charlie, I don't wish for you to turn on your own side. You are, of course, a former special advisor to Michael Gove, the Conservative minister. But do you not think that perhaps the government have been a little bit poor, have left something to be desired in terms of how they've gone about this whole situation? It seems they're constantly on the back foot.
I don't, actually. Might not surprise you to say that, but I think what we've got to look at is everything in the round. And everybody knows that 2022 was a turbulent year in terms of the economy. We're in a tough economic situation as we are. And I think everybody recognises that with Rishi's commitments that he set out last week, so bringing debt down, bringing inflation down, growing the economy, once you can achieve those goals, that allows you then to look at public sector pay. It allows you to get the economy growing again, redistributing that revenue and getting our public services sectors back to where they should be. But until you achieve that, we all understand the financial restraints that we're all in. There isn't money in the coffers. And so everybody just needs to, I think, exercise that restraint. We're all in it together. And until we get that growth in the economy, we can make progress thereafter.
Now, Paul, sorry to keep you waiting there. Now, you will be of a very different opinion on this one, I assume. Do you think there's any case for minimum service levels to be brought in?
We're all in it together. How many times have we heard that? And the truth is, it's just not true, is it? No, this move is completely inflammatory. It's wrong. It's pretty obvious what's going on here. The government has not been able to defeat the strikes, and therefore it wants to change the rules. It wants to bring in legislation, making it effectively illegal for a number of workers to take strike action. And that really takes us back to the dark days of industrial relations in this country, where any kind of industrial action was seen as inherently illegitimate. That's the game that we're in at the moment. It's like two boxers, and one is landing heavy blows on the other, and so the other boxer's corner decides to change the rules and say, "Oh, can the other boxer fight with one hand tied behind his back, please?" That's exactly what's going on here, and I have to say it's unworkable, because the idea that thousands of workers who have voted democratically to take part in industrial action through their trade union are going to willingly abandon that industrial action and walk across picket lines, something that's a cardinal sin in the trade union movement, walk across picket lines which their colleagues are manning just because the government has told them to do it, I think is completely fanciful and shows that the government doesn't understand the very basics of trade unionism or worker solidarity in the first place, frankly.
Well, isn't this the thing, Charlie, really, that minimum service level agreements may sound good to some people who want to get to work, who want to be able to use the NHS, regardless of workers' pay demands and strike action, but actually it's rather unworkable in reality. People aren't going to go into work when the rest of their mates are out on the picket line. They could refuse. There would be long legal challenges and so on. Would it not be better and more straightforward for the government to just outright ban strikes when it comes to emergency services?
Well, I think, as the Prime Minister said the other day, that look, the legislation that the government wants to bring forward is no different to what we see in France, in Spain, in Italy. So I think it is perfectly legitimate to say that it's going to be workable. What we can't have in this country is going, after having a pandemic lockdown, to a union shutdown in this country. We need to ensure that there is that minimum safety service there to ensure that patients, to ensure that people, if they need to call on a firefighter, they will get that minimal service. They will get the emergency response that people deserve, that people need. And I think it is absolutely right that people would expect that. And so that is what the government is proposing. That's the legislation that it'll bring forward. And as I say, I think it is the balance between not just protecting the public service and the public sector, but just protecting the public.
Paul, what do you make of the latest news that junior doctors apparently want to walk out for 72 hours in March? They're demanding 26% increase in their pay. Do you genuinely think that is reasonable?
Well, look, every trade union that negotiates will put down an opening figure knowing full well it's very likely.
But to threaten no A&E emergency cover, that's the sticking point for me.
Well, the point is this, Emily. And it's a point that Charlie didn't address, what are the root causes of why so many workers are currently up and down the country taking strike action? Is it because, there's this sort of weird phenomenon where they've all woken up one morning and decided that they're going to do something that many of them have never done before, which is to withdraw their labour? Of course it's not. It's because of the economic landscape that they're facing at the moment. Millions of workers up and down this country are being told that they have to accept another real terms pay cut after 10 years of low pay increases for many of them. What we've seen in this country recently is a major transfer of wealth from rich to poor, not least as a result of the pandemic. And frankly, workers have had enough. They've said, we're not prepared to pay the price of another financial crisis that we did not create. We're not prepared to accept another real terms pay cut. And rather than address that situation and give people the kind of wage increases that they deserve, what the government is trying to do is to say, well, we're going to force you to accept low wages because even though you may democratically vote to take industrial action, we're not going to allow it. And if you take it, we're going to sue your union and we might even sack you. That is the action, I think, of a deeply authoritarian government, and a government that hasn't grasped just how this cost of living crisis is hitting people so hard to the degree where millions are prepared to fight back and take to picket lines when many of them haven't done that before.
I mean, there is absolutely no denying that the economy at the moment is in a state of crisis. Well, it's not producing enough wages. Wages aren't keeping in line with inflation and people are very much struggling. But is not the issue, Charlie, one of the major issues, and the ONS stats back this up, that productivity in the public sector has not increased throughout the Conservatives' rule? Over their 12 years in government, productivity has been stagnant. In order to award people wages that they have a good case for, productivity needs to rise too.
Well, I think that's part of the conversation that will take place when unions meet with ministers on Monday. The public sector service that is covered by the pay review body, all of this information will be open, so there can be frank discussions about pay, about working conditions, and about productivity, and about delivery. Now, to address Paul's point about workers and people trying to get back to work, there'll be many workers across this country that haven't been able to go to work because of the rail strikes, which I don't think commands much sympathy amongst the public. But in order to address the cost of living, the number one issue to help people through this difficult time is to bring inflation down. And that's what Rishi Sunak set out last week. That's one of his number one aim that he set out, as I say, last week. Because if you continue to chase inflation and chase inflationary pay measures, particularly above and beyond 11%, if you just get up to the 11%, which I think was originally asked, that will cost £28 billion. That's £1,000 per household, according to the government's figures. That is simply unaffordable. And I think the public recognise that, given the state the economy is in, we all just need to let the government get on addressing its economic plan, reduce the debt, reduce deficit, get inflation down, and let the economy...
I mean, that sounds brilliant. That's exactly what the government wants us all to think, that they are, thinking about inflation first, and that any wage increases in the public sector would be inflationary and that would make everything worse, a wage price spiral, etc., etc. Paul, you were shaking your head there. What would you like to say?
Well, simply that the argument about inflation is a red herring. The inflation that we're experiencing in the system at the moment has got nothing to do with wage demands. The inflation we're experiencing has come about largely as a result of the opening up of the economy after the pandemic.